there's a version of charisma you've been taught to admire. Warm, friendly, disarming. The kind that smiles a little too often, laughs a little too easily, and asks for nothing in return. That's not power. That's decoration. Real charisma. The kind that shifts rooms, bends conversations, and quietly rewrites decisions. Doesn't feel safe. It feels inevitable. It doesn't ask for attention. It absorbs it. It doesn't convince you. It makes resistance feel irrational. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't follow confidence. They follow certainty, even when that certainty is wrong, even when it's dangerous. Because the human brain is not wired to seek truth. It's wired to reduce uncertainty. And the individuals who understand that don't need to argue. They don't need to dominate loudly. They simply create conditions where your mind chooses to surrender. This is what we'll call dark charisma. Not evil, not mystical, just precise. But understand this before we go further. These patterns exist whether you study them or not. So you can either recognize them or be influenced by them. Most people are addicted to filling space. They talk too fast, respond too quickly, explain too much, and in doing so, they give away something extremely valuable. Psychological ground. The vacuum effect is the deliberate removal of unnecessary input. Silence, stillness, delayed reaction. When you pause, just a second longer than expected, you create tension. And the human brain hates unresolved tension. So it tries to resolve it by leaning toward you, by filling the gap, by seeking your approval. This is the dark logic. When you don't chase engagement, engagement chases you. Because attention flows toward what feels incomplete, people begin to project meaning onto your silence, authority onto your stillness, depth onto your restraint. Not because it's always there, but because the brain cannot tolerate ambiguity. So, it invents significance. Used responsibly, this is composure. Used irresponsibly, it becomes a form of subtle pressure, and most people never even notice it happening. Consistency feels safe, but unpredictability feels powerful. Not chaos, not randomness. Controlled unpredictability. A slight shift in tone, an unexpected pause, a reaction that breaks the pattern, just enough to disrupt expectation. The brain is a prediction machine. It constantly tries to map behavior so it can relax. When someone becomes too predictable, the brain downgrades their importance. But when someone becomes slightly unpredictable, the brain elevates them, because unpredictability signals potential risk or reward. Both demand attention. This is why certain individuals feel magnetic, not because they are louder, but because they are harder to model. And what cannot be easily predicted cannot be easily dismissed. But here's the boundary. There's a difference between presence and instability. One builds intrigue, the other destroys trust. The line between them is thinner than most people realize. Every interaction operates inside a frame, a silent agreement about what matters, who leads, what tone defines the exchange. Most people enter conversations and adapt. They mirror, they adjust, they follow. But individuals with strong presence do something different. They set the frame, not by force, but by assumption. They speak as if their interpretation is the default. They act as if their perspective requires no validation. And the brain, again, looks for efficiency. It asks, is it easier to challenge this or align with it? Most of the time, it aligns, because challenging a confident frame requires energy, risk, and social friction. And the brain avoids all three. This is the dark logic. People don't just respond to what you say. They respond to the context you establish before you say it. But awareness matters here, because framing can guide, or it can manipulate. And the difference lies in intent. Availability lowers perceived value. This is not opinion, it's cognitive bias. The more accessible something is, the less urgent it feels, the less rare it feels. And the brain equates rarity with importance. So individuals with presence don't overextend. They don't over-explain. They don't over-offer. They signal, subtly, that their time, attention, and approval are limited resources. Not through arrogance, but through boundaries. And boundaries create contrast. Contrast creates perception, and perception shapes behavior. This is why people often pursue what feels slightly out of reach, not because it's objectively better, but because the brain assigns higher value to what isn't guaranteed. But here's the reality check. Artificial scarcity erodes trust over time. Genuine boundaries build respect, and the brain can tell the difference. Eventually. Most people react. They mirror emotions automatically. Tension rises. They become tense. Energy spikes. They escalate. But individuals with strong presence don't mirror. They regulate. They choose emotional responses with precision. Calm when others expect urgency. Stillness when others expect reaction. And this creates a symmetry. The brain interprets emotional control as stability, and stability as authority. Because if someone is not reacting, they must understand something others don't. This is the silent assumption, and it shifts the dynamic instantly. But there's a deeper layer. Emotions are contagious, and the person who controls their own emotional state often influences the emotional state of others, not through force, but through alignment pressure. However, suppressed emotion is not the same as controlled emotion. One disconnects, the other stabilizes, and the difference defines whether people trust you or distance themselves. Confidence is visible, certainty is felt, and the brain responds more strongly to what it feels than what it sees. When someone speaks with hesitation, qualifiers, and doubt, the brain mirrors that uncertainty. But when someone communicates with clarity, structure, and calm conviction, the brain relaxes, not because the information is always correct, but because it feels resolved. This is the certainty illusion, and it's powerful, because the brain prefers a clear answer over a correct one, especially under pressure. This is why decisive individuals often lead, even in ambiguity. But this is also where the greatest risk exists, because certainty without reflection becomes rigidity, and rigidity eventually breaks. So the real skill isn't projecting certainty blindly. It's knowing when clarity serves and when humility is required. There is no single charisma switch, no instant transformation, only patterns, subtle shifts in behavior that influence how the brain interprets you. Silence instead of noise, precision instead of excess, control instead of reaction. And over time, these patterns compound until presence becomes something that doesn't need to be announced, only felt. But here's the final warning. Influence is neutral. It reflects the intent behind it. The same awareness that protects you can also be used to pressure others, to distort perception, to create imbalance. And once you cross that line, it becomes harder to see clearly again. So take this for what it is. Not a toolkit for control, but a lens, a way to recognize the invisible dynamics shaping every interaction around you. Because the most dangerous influence is the one you never notice, and the most powerful position you can hold.